I'm Abby, I have a noisy jacket, and this is Vinyl Monday. So welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time here. Vinyl Monday is the who, what, when, where, why, and how do I feel about classic albums in my collection. If TV show length episodes aren't your thing, don't worry. I also do Vinyl Monday in 60 seconds here on my channel, over on my Instagram, as well as TikTok. Before we begin, I'm gonna let you know about some podcast news, not the podcast that I host with my friend Emma. That's not coming back until the new year. I wanted to let you know that I was invited to guest on one of the best Beatles podcasts out there, the Beatles Note by Note. Both Nancy of Vinyl Friday and Lars of Larsland have appeared on the show before me, so this is kind of a trifecta thing. This show was such a blast. Peter and Kenyon had me laughing so hard my sides hurt. If you'd like to hear me grading Beatles fashion and talking about my favorite song off Beatles for Sale, I'm a Loser, the link to my Beatles Note by Note appearance is in the description. Back to the regularly scheduled show. We are coming up on the end of 2025. There are 4 more regular episodes of the year and all the double album December nonsense to follow. It was always my intention to keep these last 4 albums of the year as one batch. I know you guys love a miniseries. This is part 1 of my 3-part miniseries evaluating what the Velvet Underground did after, well, the Velvet Underground. After this member's departure from the Velvets, the whole thing fell apart. It took several years for him to find his creative footing afterwards. Once he did find it, he remained committed to continually destabilizing said creative footing for literally the rest of his life. As the man himself said, "It's really boring being the best show in town. I took it as far as I could possibly go, and then OUT." This effort was the first instance of him going OUT. But most of us call it Berlin. Congrats if you guessed this one. Remember, if you want to play along, all you gotta do is check out my post tab. That's where I post the hints to what the next album is gonna be. I make announcements, I host polls. You can find all of that on my channel. And if you so choose, you can always read the written versions of my reviews on my website, linked in the description. All right. Let's take the plastic off on the first album of this December madness. Oh my god. I'm a little scared. My copy is an original from the UK, and this was sent to me by a subscriber. This was his own personal copy of Berlin. Thank you, kind subscriber, for sending your personal copy of this album my way so that this episode could happen. The Berlin packaging was designed by Pacific Eye and Ear Studios. Since Berlin was supposed to be a double album, Lou planned this elaborate gatefold with photographs depicting scenes from the songs, but RCA couldn't find the budget for him, or couldn't find the budget for him once they realized what Berlin was gonna be. Instead, we have a photo of Lou with the central characters of this album, Jim and his wife Caroline. And instead of a libretto telling the story of Berlin, we have a lyric sheet with calligraphy by Bill Garland. The green is a reference to the song Lady Day. It had greenish walls, a bathroom in the hall, and the broken glass, a reference to the broken window on Caroline Says Too. On Berlin, we have the first of our ex-Velvets, Lou Reed, on lead vocals, acoustic guitar, and serving as principal songwriter. He is backed by Steve Hunter and Dick Wagner, both on guitar, Steve Winwood on organ and harmonium, Jack Bruce on bass, Michael and Randy Brecker fill out our brass section, trumpet and saxophone respectively, and Ainsley Dunbar on all tracks except Lady Day and The Kids. Those were played by BJ Wilson. Our guests include Blue Weaver of the Amen Corner and the Straubs playing piano on Men of Good Fortune, and the London Philharmonic Orchestra with arrangements by Bob Ezrin and Alan Macmillan. Bob plays a handful of instruments as well, including the mellotron. Berlin was produced by Bob Ezrin. Roll transition. Things don't start out so bad. After 6 years of toiling away, Lou Reed is finally tasting commercial success. Mop the Hoople made Sweet Jane a hit, and thanks to surprise hit Walk on the Wild Side, Transformer finally entered the Billboard albums chart months after its release. How did a song so obviously about trans women and gay men make it onto mainstream rock radio in 1972? No clue. It was a complete fucking fluke, and I love it. It made Lou a gay icon, and the gigs to support Transformer earned him a reputation of a killer live act, as he sang Velvet Underground favorite Sister Ray in Miami, the same place Jim Morrison was arrested for alleged indecent exposure. Lou playfully bonked the cops wearing riot gear on their helmets with his microphone as he sang about sucking on Ding Dong. They were not amused. Lou gets arrested. He thinks it's great though. But suddenly receiving the success he always wanted and always envisioned for himself put an enormous amount of pressure on Lou. He drank to cope with writer's block, became depressed because he drank even more. It was a vicious cycle. As Lou so often did when his collaborators got their due credit, Andy Warhol, Nico, John Cale, he began to resent Transformer producer David Bowie. According to biographer Victor Bachris, contemporary audiences gave Bowie and Mick Ronson more credit for Transformer than Lou himself. It made Lou's writer's block even worse. Bob Ezrin said, quote, "The problem was Lou didn't know how to follow Transformer. The direction of it hadn't been his in the first place." Success also brought unwanted attention. An overzealous fan made it on stage screaming "leather" in reference to Lou's shiny black leather pants and literally bit him on the ass. Lou laughed it off at first, but it really freaked him out. Lou became cynical about his own success, about the Phantom of Rock persona RCA had crafted for Transformer. He said, "It did what it was supposed to do. Like I say, I wanted to get popular so I could be the biggest schlock around. And I turned out to be a really big schlock because my shit's better than other people's diamonds." Always a humble one, Lou Reed. He pulls another cynical move, one that seems entirely out of character for him. Marriage. At a VU gig back in 1970, Lou met college student Betty Kronstad. They were both Jewish, they were both from Long Island, and that is literally all they had in common. Betty said, quote, "He wasn't my type, but he was interesting. My first impression was that he had a serious ego, but I was perceptive enough to know that this often implies, in truth, quite the opposite." In January of 1973, Lou and Betty were married. Her family hated him, so they didn't attend. Lou didn't invite his family out of solidarity, and this deeply hurt his sister and mother. Thankfully, they missed a pretty disrespectful show. Lou hit on the officiant, and their reception was a dinner with the RCA execs about Lou's career. The honeymoon and the rest of their short-lived marriage would be just as spectacularly disrespectful to Betty. On a day off in Canada, Lou meets producer Bob Ezrin. Bob had produced Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels cover of Rock and Roll. He was working with Alice Cooper. Lou hated Alice, but couldn't help but respect the grind. Around the same time, RCA calls and gives Lou less than a month to present a follow-up to Transformer. He is seriously freaking out. So he revisits a song on Self-Titled, one Bob pointed him to.
In Berlin, by the wall.
Why Berlin? Anthony DeCurtis explains, quote, "On the Self-Titled album, the song plays like a sketch, filled with suggestive details, but never really culminating in any satisfactory way. But perhaps it was the song's unfinished quality that appealed to them, leaving space for them to fill with their fantasies of what it might become." Also, why Berlin? Weimar-era Germany was becoming strangely culturally relevant. The film adaptation of Cabaret had swept the 45th Oscars. The book it's based on, Goodbye to Berlin, was having a moment as well. Where Transformer had this campy cabaret quality, Lou wanted to get serious with the next. Berlin was conceived as the soundtrack to a movie that didn't exist. A film for the ear, or movie without pictures, both terms were used interchangeably, about a down-and-out American couple living in Berlin. There were talks of adapting this story into a Broadway musical starring Lou as the narrator, and Bob was all in. In April, they rallied the troops and flew to London to record Berlin at Morgan Studios. This was Bob's chance to go full George Martin. He even hyped up Lou's next project as the Sgt. Peppers of the 70s. He pulls out all the stops, strings, horns, a choir, and the freaking London Philharmonic. He assembles an all-star group of session players, including 2 of Alice Cooper's guys, Blue Weaver, B.J. Wilson, and 2 of Eric Clapton's collaborators, Jack Bruce and Steve Winwood. Steve was back with Traffic, Jack was floundering after the dissolution of Wes Bruce and Lang. Ironically, BJ's replacement Ainsley Dunbar played with Lou's one-sided mortal enemy, Frank Zappa. And Jack Bruce also collaborated with Frank on the title track of his smash hit Apostrophe that year. Getting all these famous faces on board was pretty easy. Lou was at the peak of his mainstream popularity after Transformer. And that's also how they got the money from RCA. On to the content of the record. Lou was all about mythologizing himself. Where Bob Dylan was an orphan circus performer in his mind, Lou Reed was a hardened street rat. Far from their respective realities of Hibbing, Minnesota and cushy middle-class Long Island. Betty was the muse of some of Lou's greatest songs. See Perfect Day. Their doomed marriage was also the muse of Berlin. I'll be using a lot of quotes in this section so you can get the fullest picture of the dynamic as you can. Betty became Lou's caretaker. She said, "My job was to keep him off drugs and alcohol so he could perform on tour, meet his contractual obligations for the record company, make those albums. Looking back, I can't believe how much responsibility was placed upon my young shoulders. But I was the only one he trusted, to whom he would listen." Betty was his closest confidant, but as a result, he would take out his frustrations on her. Everybody knew he was abusive, Betty recalled. Abusive with his drinking, his drugs, his emotions. With me, he was incredibly self-destructive then. Things got so bad, Betty flew to the Dominican Republic for a 24-hour divorce. The papers were in Spanish, but they were legally binding. But the very next week, she got back with him. Why? She was stuck in a loop and felt responsible for him. According to author Will Hermes, she, quote, thought her ex-husband had made a great work of art, and that it was her duty to help him see it through. Betty said, "With Lou, people that he loves become part of him, so I got to be part of that incredible self-destructiveness." Lou made a myth of his and Betty's marriage for Berlin. Victor Bockris claims that Betty was so miserable she'd suicide, like Caroline does on the album. Lou claimed the same many times to the press, even taking on a bragging tone about it, but Betty herself denies this ever happened. "I have read in newspaper and magazine reports that I tried to kill myself during the recording of Berlin. That's a lie. Everyone around at that time knows I would never do that, and didn't. I was too involved in keeping Louis," she calls him his government name, straight to get through the recording sessions. What was taken from her real life for Berlin was her mother losing custody of her. She was an 18-year-old single mother who left her husband, Betty's father, because he was abusive. Betty's mother passed around the time he wrote Berlin. This exploitation and mythologizing of her very personal life, wearing, quote, her tortured life like a badge of courage, as Victor Bockris described it, deeply hurt Betty and accelerated the breakdown of their marriage. Recording Berlin was not that much better than the marriage. The drugs and the stress nearly fucking killed Bob Ezrin and gave him mild PTSD. Sessions were permeated by rock and roll excess. Lou was super enthusiastic about the project, but he could hardly function. Most of his vocals had to be redone at the record plant in New York after the fact. Though Lou excommunicated him, Bowie still visited. In that eloquent Bowie way, he perfectly described the atmosphere and conflict of sessions. There were a lot of tensions in the room, not so much between Lou and me as between Lou and life. Once RCA had heard what Lou and Bob had produced, they immediately axed the planned Broadway musical way too fucking dark. They also gutted the planned double album. They pared back the packaging, edited the instrumentals, and forced Lou to cut 14 minutes of material. Bob was devastated by this. He refused to listen to the acetate, advising Lou to just put it in a drawer and forget about it. He took it so hard he had a breakdown and check himself into treatment. It wasn't easy to to get the label behind Berlin once they realized what they'd funded. Lou had to make a deal with the devil of sorts to get it out. In exchange for his and Bob's passion project seeing the light of day, Lou had to deliver one more album in the glammy style of Transformer and a live album with the same mainstream appeal. Because, spoiler alert, this was not producing hits. The track listing of Berlin goes as follows. Opening up side 1, we have the title track Berlin, followed by Lady Day. Then Men of Good Fortune. Next, Caroline Says, How Do You Think It Feels? And side 1 closes with Oh Jim. Opening up side 2, we have Caroline Says 2, followed by The Kids. Then The Bed, and the album closes with Sad Song. The madness continued on the Rock and Roll Animal Tour, which slightly predated the release of the album. The Berlin album, not the Rock and Roll Animal album. Yes, that is an album, but like this album. Quote, "It was as if, in advance of the album drop, Lou was determined to stage Berlin as a reality show. A lot of drinking and drugging either made these shows the best or the worst people had ever seen from him. Lou did a massive dose of meth and nearly fucking killed himself on stage in Brussels. He also ripped his leather pants. He was not wearing underwear. They had to, gaff tape him back in. Despite Lou's best efforts, that tour produced the first in his 2-album deal with the devil, Rock and Roll Animal. This was Lou's first gold-certified album, somehow beating Transformer to that. I love this version of Heroin. Reviews of Berlin were a lot more mixed is technically the term, but we are on very opposite ends of the spectrum here. Stephen Davis for Rolling Stone called it a disaster. Quote, "Reed's only excuse for this kind of performance can only be that this was his last shot at a once promising career." But then Timothy Ferris criticizes Davis's review in another review of another Lou Reed album. Davis characterized the record as, quote within a quote, "a distorted and degenerate this word of paranoia, schizophrenia, degradation, pill-induced violence, and suicide. But I fail to see how that makes it a bad record. Prettiness has nothing to do with art, nor does good taste, good manners, or good morals." But if we're talking about Lou Reed in the 70s, we can't not talk about Lester Bangs. Their dynamic fascinates me. Les had great rapport with Lou, but he really shouldn't have. A lot of their interactions are weird and sad. A lot of, don't meet your heroes-ing that dictates, every great Lester Bangs essay about Lou Reed. Their first meeting somehow didn't sour Les's opinion of Lou's next, hailing it, quote, "the most disgustingly brilliant album of the year." With a project like this, quote, "shy of the rock opera kiss of death," Lou is able to fully flesh out his characters. There has always been a literary instinct behind Lou's best writing. Classics like Sweet Jane were 4-minute short stories with recognizable characters acting out their roles. In Berlin, the silhouettes have been filled in till they're living, breathing monsters. Who are those characters? The bastard progeny of a drunken, flaccid tumble between Tennessee Williams and Hubert Last Exit from Brooklyn Selby Jr. The critical hullabaloo Berlin caused, unfortunately, didn't do much for its sales in the US. It barely made the Billboard Hot 100 over here. It did way better in the UK, though, making the top 10, which is remarkable seeing as what this album is, but all the more remarkable considering Transformer was still on the charts there. But with no hit singles and abysmal sales compared to Transformer overall, Lou focused on the negative. Same with the failure of the planned Broadway show. Not even hitting up his old friend Andy Warhol for money could make it happen. But in the decades since, Berlin has become something of a cult classic, enough to warrant a 5-night filmed residency at St. Anne's in Brooklyn in 2006. Seeing Sad Song live is fucking incredible, and it's great seeing Lou's dream of a Berlin show coming true. Sort of. As for Betty, she broke up with Lou for good after a blow-up in Paris. She got her life back on track, became an English teacher. She wrote a book, about 10 years ago. A more accurate title might have been Perfect Day, My Life with Lou Reed, as opposed to A Portrait of Lou Reed. But other than this book, she's lived a pretty normal life. And she seems to have forgiven Lou, fully supporting his induction to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So, what do I think of Berlin?
Sad song.
I hate to validate Lou's insecurity here because there is something about him that really endears him to me, but I think he was only as good as his collaborators. John Cale, Doug Yule, that guy doesn't get nearly enough credit. Mick Ronson, David Bowie. When Lou was fed the genius narrative, his work suffered. Bob Ezrin did not fawn all over Lou, but he gave Berlin his all. The arrangements are top-notch, the musicians he gathered were top-notch, the treatment of the material is respectful and impactful. The characterization of Jim and Caroline gets to me. These two look into each other's eyes and there's nothing there. No love, no hate, nothing. That's even more disturbing than hate. They do this insane shit to hurt each other, and they still feel nothing. It reminds me of the alpha couple of Mountain Goats lore, where the alpha couple's love was like the border between Greece and Albania. Jim and Caroline are like the divided city of Berlin. The title track is transformed from its original appearance on the self-titled album. After an unseen MC counts us in German, his voice slowed like a lagging film reel, our story begins on Caroline's birthday. The references to Casablanca are replaced by drunken patrons singing her happy birthday. The narrator, presumably Jim, reminisces on meeting his love. In Berlin, by the wall, you were 5'10" tall. It was very nice. As the bar piano plays, he romanticizes the chaotic, trashy dive they're in. They share Dubonnet on ice, and he spins a tale of a swanky cafe. You could hear the guitars play. It was very nice. As we'll come to understand, the piano is the through line of Berlin. If this were a musical, this would be the instrument who sings all the way through. So it's jarring when that instrument falls away, for Lou to wistfully croon, "Oh honey, it was paradise."
Honey,
Brace yourself, dear listener, this is as good as it's gonna get for Jim and our birthday girl. This paradise, real or manufactured, won't last much longer. The song cycle format brings us right to Lady Day. It's not clear from the lyrics, seeing as Lou intended this to be the story of Jim and Caroline, we can infer Lady Day is Caroline's stage name. It is her who was like a child staring at her feet. Tempted by the spotlight and the validation of a crowd, she becomes a bar singer. This place isn't even nice enough to give her a stage. She climbs off the bar at the end of her show. One can imagine her dressed in a slinky gown, getting leered at by drunk men all night, returning to her hotel room with the greenish walls and the bathroom in the hall to sleep all day. Not exactly the glamorous gig she signed up for. Lou can't resist the urge to mimic Caroline's bump and grind routine. Listen to how he hangs on to that.
And I said, no, no, no.
This is the first show of Bob Ezrin's extravagant production. Everything is heavy, like heavy smoke and perfume. The heavy-handed application of organs says Caroline is doomed, though right now we only think she's doomed to sing in this seedy bar until her beauty and talent waste away. Men of Good Fortune presumably introduces Jim and his cynical, nihilistic worldview. This seems to be his motivation for using drugs. Jim is not a man of good fortune. He doesn't get to build empires or make them fall, but the man of poor beginnings doesn't have it much better. No one is happy with their social standings, and they can't get happy because the system holds them in place. It breeds the environment for the rich to get richer and greedier, he says. The rich son waits for his father to die, and it makes the poor poorer. Men of poor beginnings often can't do anything at all. It takes money to make money. This all sounds familiar. It's a dog-eat-dog world, Jim says, but he's indifferent to it. And me, I just don't care at all. The world has made him hard. Jim is saying all this over a rocking instrumental. Lou's voice has heavy reverb, bringing the drama. I can hear his spit on the mic. His world-hardened observations are accentuated by descending guitar stabs and crashing drums. As far as our players go, my MVP might have to be Jack Bruce. His bass playing from here on out is consistently on the money. Where Dick and Steve's guitars are oddly reserved, sticking to rhythm lines, Jack takes the role of a lead instrument like he did in Cream. He's a point of interest. Listen to the lick he interjects into the beat Lou takes on.
They have no rich daddy to fall back on.
It's intuitive and illustrative. Around this point in the Berlin story is where I think they had to start making cuts. We jump right from Caroline's origin story to Jim's to their unhappy relationship. We can file their meeting, the title track, somewhere in the middle, but I'd have liked an exploration of cynic Jim making what Lou saw a cynical move. Marrying Caroline. Caroline says one, Lou sure did love a Woman's Name Says song.
Lisa says on a night like this, Stephanie says.
Is Jim detailing all of Caroline's supposed grievances with him, which boils down to, she wants a real man. The instrumentation is bouncy and weirdly danceable with theatrical woodwinds. Jack's bass playing is harmonic and groovy, phased guitar accents further lighten things up, and a choir highlights Jim's humiliation. Lou makes his delivery absolutely weird. His choice in which syllables he stresses is entirely perplexing, and his exaggerated squiggly vibrato is hysterical. His delivery of "man" gets me every time, and queen is just as delightful. Overall, Lou wants us to point and laugh at Jim and how much of a loser he is. Ainsley's drumming, the lively rhythm guitar, and gradual implementation of the orchestra bring this thing home. It transforms this from a lowbrow scene of us throwing tomatoes at the heel to a cinematic end of Act 1. The final flourish is one of my favorite moments on the record. It's a sliver of brightness. Except this isn't the end of Act 1. There's a bizarre cut from Caroline Says 1 to How Do You Think It Feels. This is where I think an interlude was chopped out. Jim continues his lament. His manly ego is bruised and he wants to have sex with his wife. How do you think it feels when all you can say is if only? How do you think it feels to only make love by proxy? The continued "come here, babies" paint a picture of a manic Jim, drunk and high as stealing the mic away from some bar singer and invading the personal space of all the female patrons. Get away from me, dude! No one wants to hear about how you got cucked! He implores us to imagine what it must be like to be in his shoes, not just in his marriage, but in his addiction. How do you think it feels when you've been up for 5 days, hunting around because you're afraid of sleeping? He's paranoid and miserable. Lou's delivery is unstable, wobbling on its feet. It's not too far off from his real life. He was barely able to function these sessions. Lou is telling us we're still supposed to laugh at Jim and say he's a loser, but it's getting harder to laugh as the topic gets heavier. How do you think it feels, and when do you think it stops? It only stops when something very, very bad happens. I'm starting to feel an impending sense of doom as the listener. How do you think it feels can't spoil the shock of Act 2, though, because the arrangement is rocking. It swaggers like Jim's delusions of grandeur. Finally, we have a guitar solo. This is all guitar, oversized brass, killer drumming by Ainsley. He might be my second pick for MVP. He's on the attack through that wild solo. And this segues into our true Act 1 finale, Oh Jim. At this point in the narrative, an empathetic listener realizes Caroline is bleeding in front of a shark. Jim's indifference has been replaced by rage, and he's gonna make Caroline pay. Any goofy charm this guy had in the past couple numbers is replaced by agitation and malice. Blinded by hate, he decides when it stops. The brass is still here, but that anxious cyclical drumbeat and synths make us queasy. We get some insight into exactly why Jim feels emasculated by Caroline, not just the no pussy blues part. They asked you for your autograph. They put you on the stage. They thought it'd be good for a laugh. He again asserts he doesn't care where it's at, but I don't believe him. This guy resents the attention Caroline gets from other men and is even envious of her success. He feels entitled to her. Either only I can have you, or I'll tear you down. As the bombastic arrangement peels away to anxious solo acoustic guitar, we get the feeling something terrible happened. When you're filled up to here with hate, don't you know you gotta set it straight? Beat her black and blue and get it straight. A viewer of this movie would have to look away here if they have a sensitive stomach, but this is a movie with no pictures, and you can't look away. All we have is Lou, in an odd 50s rock and roll rhythm, voicing hurt and confused Caroline. Oh, Jim, how could you treat me this way? You know you broke my heart ever since you went away. Caroline Says Too begins the linchpin trilogy of songs on Berlin. Rock operas make you feel what the characters feel through the instruments, leitmotifs, or certain swells a listener looks for. Caroline Says Too has a delicate and meek arrangement. Mellotron, mournful strings, minimal drumming. Twinkling chimes like broken glass, like a broken and bruised Caroline. Same with Lou's tender delivery, though she stands up to Jim with her words. You can beat me all you want, but I don't love you anymore. Her spirit has been broken. She feels nothing anymore. Her friends call her Alaska. It's so cold in Alaska. Since she can't really feel anything anymore, even though she really should leave, she's not gonna. She's so numb, she puts her hand through a window, and it doesn't hurt her. Instead, it was a funny feeling. Those Alaska lines came from Stephanie Says, a VU song drafted all the way back in 1967 that went unreleased until 1985. It's one of my favorite Velvet Underground songs.
Afraid to die. The people all call her Alaska.
A number of Berlin songs, actually, Men of Good Fortune and Oh Jim, started their lives as Velvet Underground songs. Stephanie Says is the best known one of the bunch, though. A listener today, having this context of the original song about a manic pixie dream girl, hearing it twisted and bloodied in this way is emotionally devastating. As if that wasn't enough, The Kids is an agonizing 8 minutes depicting Jim's final act of revenge. Number 1. These two brought kids into the world? Oh God! Between a miserable wife-beating junkie and a miserable rotten slut, neither of these two are fit parents from the sound of it. Children brought into these situations are destined to fail. Number 2. The song sounds hollow and detached because Jim is. He was the one who reported Caroline to the authorities on the principle that she was sleeping around, although we don't actually know if she did that. She only threatened to if Jim couldn't deliver. All we have is Jim's word, and a man's word usually wins out over a woman's. Jim didn't report Caroline out of concern for his own children, but out of spite for his ex-wife. That's f***ed up. Thank God for welfare, but no child should have to be a ward of the state, if that makes any sense. There are no winners in this situation. Everyone loses, especially these kids who scream for their mother for several minutes on end. I've been thinking a lot about The Kids lately, and it's a strange display of complex empathy from Lou. Self-awareness, even, considering all of the things that could go wrong if he were to have a child in this state. He may be the villain. Lou Reed is absolutely the villain in this story, in his own story. A lot of the times, he is a villain, but he's not a monster. Utterly despondent after losing custody of her children, Caroline commits suicide. The bed is chilling, little more than Lou's reverbed voice and acoustic guitar as he goes into harrowing detail about this scene. Your jaw drops as he plaintively sings the line, "I might get demonetized for reading this line to you, but I'm gonna try really hard to keep it in," and this is the place where she cut her wrists that odd and fateful night. Contrasting that with "This is the place where we used to live, I paid for it in love and blood," breaks what isn't left to be broken. And then Jim continues, callously describing the affects she left behind. "This is the place where she used to lay her head at night. These are her candles. These are her boxes of poetry. A flicker of light in such a dark existence, and her hopes and dreams stowed away in boxes on the shelf. The faraway backing vocals are her ghost singing to us." Lou's beautiful delivery makes it seem like Jim might have some remorse for what he drove Caroline to do. I never would have started if I'd known that it'd end this way. But he doesn't have remorse. Funny thing, I'm not at all sad that it stopped this way. He decided long ago where it would end. Some sick part of Jim wanted this all along. I hesitate to side with any party in this situation. Jim and Caroline are both terrible people. She probably should have lost custody of her kids if that was going on, but she didn't deserve this. The utter contempt Jim had for Caroline's suffering became indifference and self-pity at her death on the sweeping, sickly, gorgeous finale, Sad Song. Bob went all out. Flutes, oboes, horns, strings, slide guitar as the sun comes up on Caroline's blood-soaked quilts, and Jim just sitting there with his bloodshot, hollow eyes. And if that sounds familiar,
Sad Song.
it's because it is. 6 years later, when Bob Ezrin teamed up with Pink Floyd for their own rock opera effort, The Wall, Bob remembered that string swell and he sampled it on
There is no pain you are receding.
Bob. Using that sample is really cool insight to how he carried the perceived failure of Berlin with him. He'd be damned if he let The Wall fail the same way, and he didn't. The Wall is the greatest rock opera of all time, and I will fight you on that in the comments. Back to Berlin. You can count on me to go on a tangent about Pink Floyd. There is no universe in which Sad Song does not move me. Lou's exhausted, sleep-deprived delivery, the twin squealing guitars, the cinematic orchestra. It's even more breathtaking in the Berlin concert film, where Lou is decades older. A Herculean effort realized. RCA called Lou the Phantom and Frankenstein, but Victor Bockris raises another movie monster. With Berlin, quote, "Each song tore away another bandage from the mummy." This may seem like a tangent, but bear with me here. When Cameron Crowe asked Joni Mitchell about achieving greatness, she said, quote, "The Blue Album. There's hardly a dishonest note in the vocals. At that period of my life, I had no personal defenses. I felt like a cellophane wrapper on a pack of cigarettes. I felt like I had absolutely no secrets from the world, and I couldn't pretend in my life to be strong or to be happy. But the advantage of it in the music was that there was no defenses there either." Joni regret releasing an album as deeply personal as Blue. After that, she pulled back, moving into her sophistopop and jazz eras. Lou, too, distanced himself from Berlin at first, but he never shied away from it being too real. Quote, "If people don't like Berlin, it's because it's too real. It's not like a TV program where all the bad things that happen to people are tolerable. Life isn't that way. And neither is the album." He's right. Berlin is unflinchingly real. He shied away because it was too close to the things he was feeling in his real life. Eternal transformer he was, Lou overhauls his look once again and distances himself from Berlin. In interview, he admitted, quote, "I can't listen to it anymore. It makes me too taut, too nervous." Later, Berlin was a big flop and it made me very sad. The way that album was overlooked was probably the biggest disappointment I ever faced. I pulled the blinds shut at that point, and they've remained closed. This album makes my stomach churn. I'm not sure I'll revisit it too much after this. this was a lot. It is beautiful and brilliant. It's some of Bob Ezrin's finest production work with an all-star backing band, but I struggle to listen to it all the way through. It's not dark in the way that Unknown Pleasures is. This is all the doom and gloom of a lost soul waiting for a guide to come and take him by the hand. Berlin isn't dark like the one album I refuse to cover, Closer. That's a man crying out for help. Berlin also isn't dark in the way Lou's former bandmate Nico's The Marble Index is. This is the darkness of a woman's inner world. Berlin is dark because, if I can never find it, Berlin is dark because it is an idol preemptively killing idol worship in the most graphic, blood and bone way he could think of. I ask myself, why the hell would he expose himself this way? If he'd kept releasing Transformers, he'd have been a rock and roll hero. Instead, he made himself the heel. Why would he seemingly self-sabotage? We never would have known John Lennon was cruel to his woman and beat her and kept her apart from the things that he loves, or that he was a jealous guy, if he hadn't told us himself. John didn't want people worshipping him. He exposed himself in interview and song over and over and over again in a manner that almost feels like self-flagellation. I've come to the conclusion that Berlin is Lou's self-flagellation. Lou was the same way. He didn't want to be idol worshipped. He said he had to make this album. If I hadn't done it, I'd have gone crazy. He is wrapped in cellophane, and you can see all the bile and gangrene underneath. My personal favorites off this one are the title track, Men of Good Fortune, Caroline Says Too, and Sad Song. Remember, if you want to keep up with all of my favorites from all the Vinyl Mondays, I have a Spotify playlist linked in my description. I update it every week. And that's it! That is Berlin! What an album to kick off this mini-series with. I'm honestly not sure what I was thinking. But what do you think of this album? What do you think of Lou Reed? I'm very invested in that question, so leave a comment below. I love hearing what you guys have to say about albums that I love, and remember, despite what some guy on the internet has to say, your opinion matters. If you like what I do here, you should like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new episodes of Vinyl Monday mornings at 11, and the first installment of Double Album December comes out this Friday at noon. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys then. Bye.